Hello everyone. I'm so proud to be part of the making of this video in support of the launch of this wonderful new website by Emma Kell. A website designed to help you, members of our profession, across the whole of Buckinghamshire. And one of the very few good things to come out of the times of great financial restrictions in our schools recently was free or very low cost professional development for teachers. And I was proud to be part of the group of consultants who gave their time freely to talk to teachers in conferences, in meetings, in bruettes across the country. And through that process I made a large number of very good professional friends, and Emma was one of them. So I was touched when she asked me if I would participate in the launch of her website, and I am proud to do so. But I do have to make an apology to you. Technically, I am lousy. I have never understood technology. I grew up before the days of technology. We didn't even have an electric iron. We didn't have TV. We didn't have toasters. We didn't have electric kettles. We didn't have any gadgets at all. And as we slowly over time acquired each one of those things, my mother would say, "Don't touch it, you'll break it." And I'm still in that mode. Her voice is an earworm in my ear. "Don't touch it, you'll break it." So I dare not investigate. A few of you may have seen the video that I posted recently on behalf of Chartered College, thanking members of our profession for all the hard work and the risk they are taking in continuing to open schools for the children of key workers so that they may care for us during this awful coronavirus epidemic. You will remember that that video is very, very dark, and the sound is so faint that even I, who knew what I had said, am actually unable to hear it properly. I apologise for that, and I hope that you're finding this video a little better. I hope we have improved the sound, and I do hope the picture is a little better, although I have to admit it may still be a bit dark for some of you. And that's because the ex-husband's voice is like an earworm in my ear. I hear him wherever I am and whatever I'm doing, saying over and over again, "But Ros, you look better in the dark." It was back in 1989. I had returned from 17 years of teaching in the Caribbean, and I was head of English in a middle school in inner city Bradford. And that's when the new national curriculum started dropping through the letterboxes of schools. And I looked at these new ring binders with interest because I really wasn't very familiar with what had been going on in England during my absence. And I was horrified to find there was a new subject proposed. Seemingly most other teachers knew nothing about it either. It was called Design and Technology. And I looked at the contents of that curriculum and it scared me to death. And I was so pleased that I was head of English in that school and I only had to teach English, and that subject would never be a worry for me. And I was also very fortunate because in my last 7 years in the Caribbean, we had had an advisor who was Caymanian but who had worked for many years in the United States in the field of assessment and curriculum. And she brought the knowledge of assessment to the Cayman Islands. So I returned to England knowing all about success criteria, learning objectives, summative, formative and diagnostic assessment, and the rest of the thinking that was going on in the United States at that time. And I understood the English curriculum and the other ring binders, except design and technology, of course. And although they were all grossly overloaded, I knew what the intent was, and I embraced the English and made it my specialism. But then, sadly, by 1990, I had realised that my two children, I was, of course, by now a single parent, my two children in their mid-teens were escaping before ever I got home from school. And I had no control over that situation because I was travelling from Bradford after a very long day at work back to Wakefield. And I realised I needed to relocate to be in control. And thus it was I found myself sitting in the staff room in a junior school on the edge of Kirklees, surrounded by young men in suits, men much younger than me and fit looking and professional looking, and I looked around and I thought I have no chance here as I waited for interview. But when I got in, the head teacher and the chair of governors listened with great attention as I talked with passion about assessment and how it worked, and they asked some perceptive questions, and I gave it my all. And when I'd finished, the chair of governors started that question that we're always asked, aren't we? If you're offered the job, will... And the head teacher said, "One moment, please. I forgot we haven't asked a very important question. We would need you, if you're appointed, to coordinate 2 subjects. Would that be all right?" And I said, "I'd love to, sir. Yes, of course. In a school this size, I would expect to coordinate 2 subjects." And he said, "Wonderful. Your second subject will be design and technology." "Oh, wow," I said. "Design and technology, how wonderful. That's my second passion." And for 3 years, I crucified design and technology in that school. But of course, at the same time, someone else was crucifying my beloved English, and someone else was crucifying my beloved art. And that's when I came to realise, colleagues, that it's crucial that whoever is leading a subject in your school has great subject knowledge and a passion for the subject. And I've maintained that belief till today. But all too often, subject leadership is a matter of inheritance, isn't it? The head will say, "That one's just left, you need to take over that subject." But I digress. This is a time of great stress for all of us as this pandemic covers the world. And it is absolutely essential, I have realised after these weeks of isolation, living by myself in this house, I have realised that routine is the answer to sanity. Routine is the route to success. And so, no matter how I feel each morning, I'm up by 8 o'clock. I shower, I dress reasonably smartly, if not professionally. I go to my desk straight away and I deal with all the many emails I get. I do my Twitter. Many of you will know I'm passionate about Twitter. And I go to the loo. And you might think that's a bit random, informing you about the loo, but it is a crucial part of the routine during this pandemic, because I am now a counter of squares of loo paper. Every time I go to the loo, I count how many squares I use. At the end of the day, I count how many visits to the loo I may have made. And I'm calculating constantly whether I have enough loo paper to last, because I have another earworm in my ear, the voice of my mother saying, "We're running low, and when it's done, it's done." My father, sadly, died when I was 5, and my mother was left with 4 children, aged 5 to 10, and she had no job. There was no widow's pension, there was no social security, there was no income of any kind. And in those days, if you couldn't feed your children, they had to go into a children's home. And those places were dire. They were cold, they were unloving, and in some cases there were evil things going on. So Mother moved us all into a huge Victorian semi-detached mausoleum, and she took in students to generate income, students from Leeds University, always men, always 6 at a time, always from Scandinavia. And she cooked and she cleaned and she washed and she ironed, and she ran that house for 11 of us, 4 children, 6 students, and my mother. And we all shared one bathroom, and we all shared one toilet, and we all shared the toilet paper. And periodically Mother would say, "The toilet paper's running low, and when it's done, it's done. So it's family, stand back." And at night she would sit at the kitchen table and cut the Daily Mail into 6-inch squares, and she would tie the squares with string at the top corner, and she would wave them at us, and she would say, "These are for family." If we complained or grumbled, Mother would say, "Think yourselves lucky." When I was young, oh, you learnt to hate those words, don't you? Mother was born in 1913. She grew up in times of dire hardship, through the Depression, through 2 world wars, through the years of intense frugality after the wars. And no families, ordinary families like us, had toilet paper in those days. We had outside toilets. Privies they were called, said Mother. And the toilet paper looked like this. It was newspaper hanging on string in the privy. And through the winter, that newspaper was always damp and often icy cold. So think yourselves lucky, because yours is stored safely under the bedding where no one can see it, in the airing cupboard on top of the hot water cylinder, and it's lovely and warm and dry. So we thought ourselves lucky. And one day I was hopping around on the landing, waiting to go to the loo with some desperation, as I did. And we always had to queue on the landing for the bathroom in the mornings. There were so many of us. And the bathroom door opened slightly, and Björn, Norwegian, put his head through the gap, and he said, "Rosalind, show me, please, the toilet paper, where it is." And I smiled, and I said, "Gladly, Björn," because I loved the students. I was 9 years old. I started young. And I skipped into the bathroom, and I opened the airing cupboard, and from it I took the Daily Mail in a wedge on a piece of string, and I offered it to him. Björn's face was a picture. I don't think that Norway ever went through the years of frugality. Where was I? Oh yes, times of frugality, times of harshness, times of stress, and for many of us, of seeing nobody and talking to nobody face to face. And I have become aware in my enforced isolation that the important thing is to establish secure routines. Do the same things when you can, at the same times of the day, and always have a list of things that you want to achieve that day. There is nothing more satisfying than working your way down a list, going tick, job done, tick, job done. Routines give you satisfaction, and they give you a sense of purpose when there may be little purpose in reality. But my routines today are different routines to the routines I had when I was working. They're bound to be different, aren't they? I'm dressed differently, I'm living my life differently. For example, I now go for a walk every day. I never would have done that in the past. I used to have 3 sorts of walk: a short walk, a medium walk, and a long walk, which depended on my energy and the weather, because I've been doing it, of course, through the winter. Now I find that I never choose the short walk. One of the benefits of a change of lifestyle and of routines, we do not know what good could come out of this time of incarceration for so many of us. But one of the things that has to change, of course, is food. Food has become quite difficult for some of us, and my daughter will not allow me to go to the old people's happy trolley time between 8 and 9 in most supermarkets. She insists on doing my shopping for me, which is most generous and such hard work for her when she's running business from home, as is her husband, and they have 2 children to home educate, which they are taking very seriously. But I have to accept that the shopping she leaves in bags at my door is often very strange. Because when there isn't something that I've requested on the shelf, she has to guess what I would choose as the next best, and it's often what I wouldn't have chosen. But in this week's shopping, there was something utterly strange that I had in no way requested, for there, in one of the carrier bags, was the largest pack of 10 ladies' nighttime nappies for the elderly and the incontinent. I was on that mobile phone so fast on night time, saying, "My daughter, can you explain to me what this is about?" And she did look sheepish, and she said, "Well, I'm sorry, Mum, but I decided that if you do get coronavirus, you may feel too poorly for a day or 2 to get out of bed, and nighttime nappies could be a help to you." I ask you, they're safely hidden in the wardrobe. But I appreciate the thought. And I have been through many hard times in the past in my lifetime, and you will go through hard times too, and you will reminisce about them. You will tell your children about the terrible coronavirus. And I remember 1986, when we were working in the Cayman Islands, and Hurricane Allen hit Cayman Brac, our island, only 12 miles long and between 1 and 1 3/4 miles wide, hit it hard from the east. Hurricane Allen was a vicious storm, a huge storm, moving terribly slowly, under 6 miles an hour most of the time, and it had wind speeds of over 160 miles an hour, and it destroyed the whole east end of Cayman Brac, our island. Everything except the concrete buildings. They were the only things that survived, and thank goodness we lived in a concrete cottage. However, we didn't weather the storm in the cottage. Like so many of the residents of Cayman Brac, we went to the community centre, built in a huge hollow on top of the bluff. The bluff was like a wedge of cheese. It started at ground level at the west end of the island. It was a rocky mass that rose to 160 feet at the east end of the island where we lived, up the middle of the island. And we were safe in that community shelter, although when it was inspected after the event, it was predicted that if the storm had lasted just a little longer, the roof would have collapsed upon us. When we came down from the community centre in our jeep, it was an old German war machine called a gurgle, fabulous thing. We were horrified to find, as we turned the bend towards the lane that ran up to the east end of the island, that there was no road left. The entire 3/4 of a mile between the sea and the bluff was totally covered in boulders. Huge boulders, some of them, up to 5 feet, 6 feet in diameter, and rocks and debris from the sea, huge sponges, dead fish and other dead animals. And there was no way through. This barrier was solid, 3-4 feet deep, from the middle of the island to the eastern tip. We were forced to turn back and spend the night lodging at a friend's house. And when the bulldozers arrived and started clearing a path down the island, it was still a long time before we could reach our cottage. Those were hard times. There was no food, but we ate well. The community, the East End community, rallied round in Spot Bay. Everybody had grown things, had grown produce in their yards, as they called all the land at the back of their cottages. They grew them usually in crevices in rock or under rocks or behind rocks to protect them from the heat of the middle of the day, because this was August when the hurricane hit. And everybody shared their produce, so we had a good mix of fruits and vegetables and salad foods. And we all kept chickens. Now, when we knew the storm was coming, the Brackers told us, "Let your chickens go. They will be safe. They will find shelter." I didn't want to. I wanted to lock them up safely in their pen and lock them even in the hen hut. I realise now that would have been washed away with the other debris. So we let them go, and they went off across the yards, over the road and under the bluff. But when we drove home and swung our jeep into the yard of our cottage, out of the bluff came 11 of our 12 hens, clucking and flapping their wings and waddling across the road back into the garden. I was so touched. I was so full of emotion, not only that they had survived, but that they had come home of their own accord. Now I am eating a strange mix of foods sometimes, because I'm hearing the words, "When it's done, it's done." Last night, for example, I started with cuppa soup. And as I tipped the powder into a mug, I looked at the sachet and I remember wondering, would this make substitute toilet paper if I needed it? I even found my mind wandering, should I be wearing the nappies right now to save the toilet paper? After the cup of soup, I had a bowl with dried pasta, baked beans and sprouts. I have to admit, I sat on the sofa and looked at it. And I thought, can I really do this? And I heard the words of my mother in my ear. When it's done, it's done. Just get your teeth stuck in. That was another of her favourite sayings. When the job was hard, get your teeth stuck in. And it made me think again of 1997, early in the autumn term, when I went back to the dentist for the nth time in months and showed him the 5 new abscesses in my mouth that had come up over the last week. He looked in my mouth and he shook his head sadly and he said, I'm afraid, Ros, I can't save your teeth any longer. You need to have them all out. I looked at him in horror. All my teeth out? I'm only in my 50s. What will I do? But there I was, the next Friday, in the chair, having all my teeth removed. Luckily, of course, he didn't leave me totally toothless to be embarrassed for weeks while my gums healed. These days, they fit you with a temporary set of very large false teeth. Large so that they don't press on the open cavities which are still bleeding and weeping from the surgery. So I walked home that day, so sad and in increasing pain as the anaesthetics wore off, with saliva and blood trickling from the corners of my mouth, and these gigantic teeth click-clacking with every step. And that was the start of a very hard time. On that first Sunday afternoon, I was sitting in my little conservatory at the back of my house, trying to read a book and distract myself, when suddenly I became aware that there was a youth standing in my back garden on the lawn. He only looked about 12 or 13, and I knew that there was only one door in my house and it was on the side. He must have walked past that door to get down onto my lawn, and yet he'd never knocked. So I sat up and I said, "Can I help you?" But he just went, "Sorry, can I help you?" So I thought, go for it, Ros. I got up, went to the door, stepped outside, looked back down the path at him and said, "I said, can I help you?" So the penny started to click, and I looked the other way up the path, and there, across the road, sitting in a row on the wall opposite, there was 6 youths. I turned back. "Are they after you?" "Well, that's all right," I said. "I'm here now. I can look after you. Off you go then." But he clearly didn't believe this rather overweight elderly lady, because he just went. So I gave my attention to the young men. I turned the other way and I said, "All right, lads, you've had your fun now. Off you go and let this boy go home." And all I got in return was a series of gestures and a little abuse. And at that moment, round the corner on the other side, came the reinforcements, Jessie and Bill, ancient on Zimmer frames. Now, Bill was of old school and he'd been in the army, and he was a huge believer that women should be treated with respect. And he started to lecture these young men in a very pompous way, and he got even more abuse and some of the foulest language I've ever heard. And suddenly I lost it. I thought, you haven't taught in some of the toughest schools in Yorkshire all these years, Ross, to listen to this stuff. Deal with it. And I charged down the path and I bellowed, I said get, and my teeth shut out, followed by copious amounts of spittle and blood. You have never seen a gang of lads run so fast in your life. As a friend said at a later point when I was telling the story, it was probably the first time they'd been bitten to death from 25 yards. And I am glad to say that Bill did recover soon afterwards. So the moral for us in these terrible times has got to be, get your teeth stuck in. Develop routines. Routines are the route to sanity. Use FaceTime to keep in touch with those you love and the dear friends in your life. Use social media. Twitter is a lifesaver for me many, many, many times. Share the routines. Share the ideas. Share the jokes. And when times are at their hardest and you don't know what to do next, just listen for my mother's earworm and get those teeth stuck in. Thank you. Good luck and stay safe.